Welcome to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. Follow the conversation using hashtag TFD News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.
Hello, and welcome back to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Hello, Tom. We are suddenly down a person this week. Francis is not with us, but that is fine because we are here ready to talk about fintech. So, Tom, how are you doing? How has your week been?
I have been very good. It's the weather's been picking up again, so the end of the week's been nice. As you said, Francis has been away. He's on holiday at the moment. He's taken a little week break. So that inevitably means that the workload gets just a little bit heavier. But we don't mind that. It means I've got to cover a lot of news this week. And yeah, I think it's been quite a busy-ish time in the fintech world. So I think there's been some good stories. Even though we managed to pick the exact same story that we wanted to cover for this podcast. So you've got a winner when that's the case. We've got a winner there.
I can't believe you're outing me on the podcast. That is outrageous. Outrageous.
Got to.
I accidentally picked the same story as Tom to talk about today, even though he'd already said he wanted to talk about the story. But it's fine. For that though, then what is the story that you're going to talk about that we both tried to talk about?
So the story that we both tried to talk about is new research that suggests that the UK financial education reforms in 2014 have failed to make an impact. And that's basically leaving many young people without much knowledge about mortgages and other finances.
Fantastic. And I am going to be talking about how UK finance is better supporting deaf people, deaf customers, and inclusion all around that. But for cruelly outing me and calling me out on the podcast, I am going to make you go first. So why don't you take it away with your story? Maybe I just really want to talk about mortgages. Maybe that's all it is.
I think that's deserved, to be honest. I deserve to go first. And clearly, if we both like the story, let's dive into it first. So yeah, basically, this new research comes from the mortgage broker service provider Boon Brokers, and they basically got in touch with us to share their new findings. And I thought they were really interesting because it shows that despite financial literacy being introduced into the national curriculum over a decade ago in 2014, about 83% of young people aged 16 to 24 in the UK who should have been impacted by that reform don't believe that school was their main source of education regarding mortgages. And in fact, the majority of respondents said they still rely on their family to provide them with the educational and working knowledge about mortgages. And this is something that hit home with me because although the reform didn't quite hit when I was, right in the middle of school, I think I was like gearing up to do my GCSEs in 2014. I didn't get any kind of education about mortgages, interest rates, affordability requirements, and it seems like that's still the case. And I actually applied for my mortgage last year, and basically I turned to my mum for a lot of questions. Every time I was a bit confused, I was like, "Mum, what does this mean? What do I do here?" And thankfully, she's moved many, many times, and she knows a lot about mortgages, but not everyone has that same level of knowledge to pass on. And what this research is basically warning about is that if parents remain the main source of information about mortgages, we're going to run the risk of recycling outdated information generation after generation. And having read the findings, I got in touch with Gerard Boon, who's the managing director of Boon Brokers, and he basically made some suggestions about how to address these shortcomings that it's found about financial education. And he said that financial education must become a compulsory and integral part of the curriculum from an early stage, and that the curriculum should evolve from basic financial principles like budgeting to more advanced topics, instilling critical thinking in financial decision-making and broader economic concepts. He also says that equally important is ensuring that the information young people receive is factual, accurate, and relevant. And this will require strategic collaboration between government bodies, financial institutions, and educational organizations to develop standardized, high-quality financial literacy resources. Now, obviously, I want to get your take on the findings, but I think I'm also kind of wondering, having looked at them, if the government should be looking maybe further beyond just school education to drive financial literacy in the UK. Obviously, there are a lot of shortcomings when it comes to financial education, as shown by this research. But, do you think it should be implementing other rules outside of, the school system, like cracking down on misinformation on social media, or maybe putting its own resources, onto social media to make, there be a new avenue to learn about mortgages and other financial education? What's your take on it? Or do you think we should, or the government should be leaving it to the school system to really drive that education?
So I think it's really great that the reform came in 2014 and we're starting to talk about things in school. I was not in school in 2014. I was long gone by then. But I remember when I was in sixth form, I ran for head girl. This is a deep cut into poly law now. I ran for head girl, and my main campaign move was that we should have, I called them life lessons, and I thought that was the best name for them possible. And basically my whole thing was that we need to be taught about, things like mortgages, things like, retirement plans, pensions, that sort of thing. Not necessarily just financial stuff, but that was a big part of it. And that was my whole campaign. I did not win head girl, which is a story for another day because it was an absolute fix. But besides the point, I think, having that education in schools has always been really important, and it's really great that it is now in the national curriculum. But I think, you're absolutely right in that a lot of the times you do rely on your parents. So when I was applying for my mortgage, I had a lot of questions for my mum and dad and for my now husband's mum and dad. And we kind of had to cobble it together by asking different people in our lives. And I think, as much as everyone loves to think their mum and dad know everything, mum and dads don't always know everything. And I think it's quite difficult sometimes to try and navigate. And especially, now as well, in another area. So when I got the mortgage, that was fine. Moved into a house, brilliant. But my fixed rate is coming to an end in the next couple of years or so. And I have no idea how to navigate that and how to figure that out because no one's ever told me. And I think people kind of forget a lot of things, in adult life, particularly in finance, is that no one ever tells you. You're just kind of expected to know what's going on. So it's really great that they have this in the curriculum, but obviously it is just not enough. And I think it's really important that we kind of do something about it now while we can, and we have so much great innovation, not just in fintech, but in the world. We're living in such a tech first age, and there's so much happening, and it just doesn't make any sense to me why we're still kind of struggling over the mortgage thing and what is a mortgage, and teaching children and young adults about, different things that they need to know in their life. And I think, it's definitely something the government should be doing. I personally think that the government needs to start a TikTok channel about mortgages and have some really cool influencer person just talking you through all these different things, because everyone gets their information off TikTok now and it's not always accurate. Like you were saying, you can't guarantee the accuracy of information on TikTok. There's a lot of misinformation spread on social media. There's a lot of people out there, trying to scam people in a lot of ways by using the guise of financial advice. So I think, number one, the government or, the finance industry, whichever financial body wants to take it, there needs to be a government-backed TikTok channel teaching you about all this stuff with a really engaging, cool person doing it. Number two, there definitely needs to be something done about misinformation online. And I think that's something that needs to happen in all industries and in all walks of life, regardless of, finance. But I think that's becoming a big problem because there are so many finance gurus online and you kind of don't know who to talk to. And I think, it's very easy to get lost in this rabbit hole and this trap of almost get rich quick schemes or I paid off my debt in 2 months, here's how I did it, and all those kind of really engaging things that we see on TikTok that we all enjoy watching but aren't super realistic, and it's very easy to forget that. So yes, absolutely something needs to be done about that. And I think just in generally, I think there's something about kind of everyone being on the same page, right, in terms of financial education. And I don't know how we do that, but I think there needs to be a willingness from the government and from, people in charge And then there needs to be a willingness from schools. There needs to be a willingness from like parents. There needs to be a willingness from like kids and young people as well to learn. And I don't quite know how we get everyone on that same page, but I think that's really important as well, to kind of align people in terms of like, this is what you need to know. This is your future. This is how you make an informed decision. And we need to start getting that, you know, really soon. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I think there's a lot of things that should be done. There's a lot of really easy wins, like a really cool TikTok account would be super easy. So if you know, the UK government want to hit me up, by all means, I'll do it. But you know, I just think it's so important to prevent bad things happening in the future for these people, for kids and stuff, through no fault of their own. It's just no one has ever taught them, or people are trying to teach them, I guess, but obviously it's not working. So something needs to be done, something needs to change. And yeah.
No, I think you're spot on, to be honest. I really like the idea of, you know, a government-backed TikTok account. Although the way that government initiatives like that sometimes go, I can see that being very hit or miss. It'll either be very well done, great influencer person, or we'll have some random dude, you know, just sat in front of a camera going, today we're going to learn about interest rates and what does that mean? What is this? Like, you'd be like, oh God, 2 views per video. No one knows the account exists. But if done well, that's exactly the type of thing that would hit home. I think, you know, for us when we were kids, you know, there were different TV shows, kids shows have like little nuggets of information about whatever it is. And that's not really the avenue to teach the next generation. They're all on social media, they're all on TikTok, and that's the place to meet them. And I think there's potentially a bit of a disconnect between, you know, like you said, these government initiatives that probably aren't really taking that very seriously, and yet that is probably the way forward for the foreseeable future. But yeah, I think it goes to show that even though that they've implemented these rules, there's a long way to go before people are actually, like you said, all given this base level of knowledge and understanding, and they're all on the same level when they leave school. And obviously that a lot more needs to be done in that respect. But yeah, hopefully they can introduce some sort of initiative. And like you said, if they fancy doing it, then they know where to go. They know who to hit up to present this new amazing TikTok show. I'm
so down. I'll do it. Not that I'm like, that feels very big-headed. I'm like, yeah, I'm super engaging. I'd get people to listen and learn about mortgages, but like, I'll do it. I'll take the hit, guys. I will learn about mortgages for everyone.
I'm willing to back it. If you need a reference, I'm here for you.
Yeah, Keir Starmer, hit me up. I will take this TikTok account and make it incredible.
Keir Starmer, a very regular listener of the News and Views podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. He loves it. It's his favourite podcast. I know for a fact. That is a joke. But anyway, let's move on to my article. So kind of very similar vibes in terms of sort of thinking about how we make access to finance and sort of understanding of finance available to everyone. So my article is all about deaf inclusion and how it is gaining ground within UK finance, according to a new LSB report. LSB, the Lending Standards Board. So basically, they have found that the financial services sector has seen a positive progress to better support deaf customers in the last 2 years, with its annual update on the availability of accessibility tools and services for deaf of hard of hearing people across the UK's financial sector coming out with 2025's Deaf Awareness Week as it gets underway. So basically, it's following its 2023 report on the challenges deaf or hard of hearing people can face when seeking access to financial services. And it has found that basic deaf accessibility services are almost ubiquitous across the industry group, with 97% offering text relays, while 84% of those with a physical customer presence, such as a bank branch, offer hearing loops. So yeah, this has been a very interesting study, and I think, you know, we're talking a lot about financial inclusion, a lot of accessibility to finance at the moment, and I know a lot of the different shows that are going on and the different events that are happening in Fintech at the moment, that's kind of one of the themes that people tend to talk about. So I think it's really great to see this research come out for the deaf inclusion industry group, which is set up alongside the 2023 LSB report, which is 34 banks, building societies and digital only lenders, insurers, debt charities and others. So to know that, the bare minimum of access for deaf people is, being implemented and is almost completely 100% implemented is fantastic news. There's still obviously a little bit more to be done, but the good news is it's all going in the right direction. So instant British Sign Language translations into call systems are offered by 73% of the group, and 63% of those with physical customer presence can provide instant in-branch BSL translations. And 27% of these firms are now offering BSL translation into their core systems as well over the last 12 months. And 38% of those are offering VRS callbacks, which is video relay systems. So, I think, the progress is there and the progress is being made. And it's great to see that it is being so positive. But, there's still a long way to go. And I think the kind of conversations that people are always having about kind of what does it take to get to a point where people with disabilities or different sort of things affecting the way that they can access what is a traditional finance service, how can we get those to be on the same level as people who don't have these extra challenges in their life? And, I think being deaf, being hard of hearing can have a really significant impact on people's ability to help, to kind of engage with financial services and get what they need. It's literally being unable to communicate with the people that you need to speak to within a branch or on the phone or things like that, or you have to go through, an interpreter or something else. And, it's all very difficult. So the fact that the improvements to services is happening is amazing, and I think it's one of those things that I think everyone can always be happy about, but it's also really frustrating that it's not going quicker. Or maybe the accessibility is there, the tools are there, but staff aren't using it properly, or it's not working. So it's one of those things that's kind of, yes, it's great, but also we could be doing more. So I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on this, Tom, and think kind of, do you think everything is kind of moving along nicely and we should just sort of sit and wait and get the progress as it comes? Or do you think there needs to be sort of more being done in this area? And then I guess who the kind of people should be doing it? This technology has kind of been around for a long time, and we're still seeing its slow implications. So I mean, what kind of things do you think in this area, Tom?
I think, first of all, I was actually quite pleasantly surprised by some of the stats in the report. The fact that so many banks, with physical bank branches offer these types of solutions. I think we have been very focused on all the bank branches are closing down, which is obviously a huge problem for accessibility. And it's good to see that for the bank branches that do remain, they're still taking it seriously. They're still trying to implement these ways to improve accessibility for those that are deaf or hard of hearing. And I think it's important to remember that it's a huge proportion of people that suffer, that are in some way either deaf or in some way hard of hearing. And, I think it's like 80, I remember, I need to look it up actually very quickly, but I'm sure it's like 15 million or, let me look it up. It's 18 million people are deaf or hard of hearing in the UK. And I think that's like 20% of the population, right, in the UK. And that's just goes to show how sort of widespread this is and how many people actually need that kind of support. And, for that reason, I think obviously it's very difficult to say who's the person responsible. And I think it's good that so many banks and financial institutions are taking it seriously, are joining these groups to ensure that they are trying at least to begin improving accessibility. But I feel like there, as is normally the case when we discuss these types of things, is you would like to see more from a government aspect, an enforcement aspect, whether it's, trying to introduce new rules to ensure that there's a very minimum level of accessibility requirements, both online and in branches, or, whether it's more of a regulatory thing where, regulators need to work more closely with these groups to ensure that it can implement rules to really ensure the growth of accessibility. Because as you said, the technology has existed for years and years and years, and yet its implementation is so slow, and which is just really annoying to see. So yeah, I think we would like to see more sort of government legislation that really drives this, because if you have actually rules in place and consequences maybe for not following the rules, then it makes a lot of sense that would drive it really quickly. And even though, as I said, it's positive, and there are some positive stats that maybe surpass my expectations. I think maybe I just have so low expectations of banks and financial institutions in general when it comes to accessibility. But it's good to see there has been progress, but it's got to be, you've got to pounce on that momentum and realize, okay, while this is happening, now's the time to drive even further change. And yeah, I think that's really where it lies, and hopefully we can see more of that coming in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you're so right. It's so easy to get excited about the bare minimum, and then you kind of step back and go, oh wait, hang on a minute, that's the bare minimum. But no, like you, I'm really I'm encouraged by the numbers, let's say that. And I think that the industry should be encouraged by those numbers as well, and use those numbers to, like you say, fuel things and keep moving. And I think it's really great that positive change is happening, but it's important that we don't stop now. And all that, Project Nima and all the other places that are like pushing inclusion and things like that, it's all great to hear. But yeah, more work to be done. But that does bring us to the end of our discussion today. Thank you so much, Tom, for chatting about fintech with me and bringing your article, even if it is the article that I wanted to talk about as well. If you want to hear any more about anything that we talked about today, head on over to fintechtimes.com. There are plenty more news and insights over there. But super quickly, we will go on to what I learned this week. So each week, being on the Fintech Times editorial team, we're learning so much about the fintech industry that we thought it'd be fun to share that with our listeners. So Tom, what have you learned this week?
So this week, one of the things that stood out to me was new findings from Which, the consumer champion, which found that consumer confidence in the UK has plummeted to the lowest levels since the cost of living crisis. And this is because 64% of consumers believe that the UK economy will get worse in the next 12 months, and only 11% believe it will get better, even after we've just had the Bank of England rate cut.
Interesting. Okay. And what I learned this week is that over the last decade, the Middle East has seen a very steady surge in fintech firms, with their operations growing by over 128% since 2011, which I thought was quite, that's quite a lot of people, and kind of seeing why the Middle East is being chosen as a fintech hub. But anyway, Tom, thank you so much for talking about fintech with me. It's been a pleasure to chat as always. Hopefully next week we'll have Francis and we'll get the gang all back together. But until then, see you next time.
See you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Don't miss next week's episode, and continue the conversation using #TFT News and Views, and follow us at the Fintech Times.